Brooklyn, nice to see you again.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, same.
Really excited to have you on. As I mentioned to the audience just now, Brooklin Nash is the head of content at Sales Hacker, and Sales Hacker is one of our wonderful sponsors for this event. Brooklin Nash doesn't have many pet peeves, but most of them start with bad content. A B2B content marketer with nearly 8 years of experience, Brooklyn is currently head of content at Sales Hacker. Outside the 9 to 5, he runs a small content shop with his wife, Becca, helping clients like Mixpanel, Metadata, and Xylo. To make his bio slightly more exciting, Brooklyn wants to tell you he lives in Guatemala between 2 volcanoes. That is very exciting, Brooklyn. And Brooklyn is here to talk about applying the Pareto Principle to SEO. So with that, Brooklyn, please take it away.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. I'm not going to say I'm going to share my screen because everybody says they share their screen. All right. Is that coming through okay? All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. I've never gotten an intro like that before, so thanks for the first. Thanks for having me to the Predictable Revenue team, and thank you to everyone who's here. Believe it or not, this is my first time doing something like this, so I'm excited. It was a lot of fun to pull these 3 kind of like mini case studies together for SEO, and I'm excited to share them. I know a lot of yesterday and today has been focused on sales. Today, we're going to kind of shift it up a little bit and focusing on content marketing and SEO specifically. So before we jump in, just a tiny bit of extra intro on top of what Sarah said. I kind of got my start in content marketing by accident. I did my master's in Tel Aviv in political communication of all things, and started freelance writing mostly to pay off student loans, and then slowly evolved from there. After Tel Aviv, we moved to Guatemala to work with a pretty tiny nonprofit here, and I continued freelance writing during that. And along the way, kind of went from freelance writer to content marketer somewhere in there as I learned the ropes of what goes into content strategy and distribution and all of that. So that's been the path from almost 8 years ago to now. We're still in Guatemala, moved out of the nonprofit world and into content marketing full time, obviously, but really loving Guatemala. From freelancing, I jumped into a very tiny sales startup called Wiza for about 9 months and headed up content marketing there. And then after 9 months, I jumped into outreach and specifically the community team focusing on Sales Hacker. And then my wife and I, like Sarah said, still run our content marketing business with a handful of clients. I didn't mean to pull a bait and switch on the team here, but as I prepared, I figured out this is less directly Pareto Principle and just more generally more with less. I'm not a math guy, so I don't know exactly the 80-20 breakdown, but it still very much applies. If you're a solo marketer, a marketing team of 1, or a director with a limited budget, this one's for you. Doing more with less for SEO. And today I have essentially 3 mini case studies that I worked on over the last 1.5 years or so. One with Sales Hacker and then the other 2 with Wiza. Number 1 is SEO updates, using content updates to drive new traffic and grow your organic traffic without necessarily having to always put out a ton of new content. Number 2 is a keyword strategy that helps you compete with the big guns like HubSpot and capture qualified traffic, those that are actually going to convert. And then the last one is backlink outreach that really matters. And I say that as someone who ran backlink outreach for Wiza and now receives a ton of backlink requests for Sales Hacker. So I've kind of been on both ends of the spectrum there. So number 1, effective SEO updates. A lot of content marketing effort goes into new content, understandably, but there's a lot of power in the content you already have up. When I joined Sales Hacker, my first goal after getting fully ramped up after the first 2 or 3 months was to look at all the content we had up and figure out how we can best optimize it. And Sales Hacker has a ton of content. It's been around almost 7 years, or more than 7 years at this point, over 1,000 content pages. And instead of doubling down on new SEO content, I wanted to look at what we had in place first and how we could improve it. And honestly, I was surprised with how successful it was, just with updating a small percentage of of the pages we had up already. So this is kind of how it looked after the fact, to just give you the context first. Started formulating this in November and December, started rolling it out into January and through February and March. So the top here is one article for one keyword, and you can see exactly when it got re-indexed by Google and got a lot more stable and higher ranking. And then the bottom is our site-wide organic traffic. And again, you can see the jump. This is just pretty much just from the Seo updates, because at the same time as we were running the updates, I kind of pulled back on our publishing cadence for new content. And we've kind of taken a different direction from topics that lots and lots of frontline sellers are searching for, and more into the niche topics aimed at VPs, RevOps, customer success, topics that may not necessarily contribute to our organic traffic. So most of this growth is just those SEO updates, as a little bit of context. So what did we do? The reason I call this more with less is there's like a right way to do SEO audits, and then there's like a scrappy, fast way to do SEO audits. And this is what that was. So we had about 1,000 content pages up. I kind of arbitrarily said, let's start with 10% of the pages. So I wanted to identify 100 pages that we could update and see what kind of impact they would have. And I created a list like this, pretty basic, as you can see. I'm not a super technical SEO or technical marketer. The criteria you set for this is going to depend on how much content you have up, what your rankings look like, who your target audience is. But for me, I set 3 basic criteria. 1, ranking for keywords that had at least 100 in search volume every month. 2, we're ranking on the bottom of page 1 through page 5. And then 3 was, and this is where my mind goes blank. Yeah, and then 3 was just the when they were published. So I only focused on content that was older than January of 2019, and just to try to not mess up anything that was a little bit fresher. And then the last kind of more nebulous criteria as I went was it had to make sense in the context. So I wasn't updating all pages that had some keywords that were ranking on the bottom of page 1 through page 5. It was only those where it would actually be an improvement to the article and made sense to start doubling down on the keywords that they were ranking for. So you can see some of the examples in this sheet. Go-to-market strategy, we're bottom of page 1. Lead generation, we're page 2. Building rapport, page 5. And all of these made sense in the context where either they were ranking relatively lower for their main target keyword, or they had kind of by accident gathered these secondary keywords, and we could add some context and add some content to them to try to fully capture those keywords. So that's the line of thinking that went into this. Let's see. And the reason this is less is more is it didn't take a ton of time to put this list of 100 pages together. I pulled out the list of URLs from SEMrush, just looking at those criteria I highlighted before. And then I went back, I spent probably no more than 5 minutes on each page, looking at what to add to these initial notes here on the right. And there were 2 buckets there. One was specific updates to each page. So the intro is a little wonky, we need to update. The information's out of date. There's a section we could add in, there's a section we need to remove, those kinds of updates, and that's a case-by-case basis. And then there were updates that we looked at across the board, making sure meta description and SEO title were optimized, making sure images had alt descriptions, making sure links weren't broken, those types of things that applied across the board. And then with these initial notes, we created more detailed briefs that outlined the exact updates to make with every single page. You have a few options to do this. It can be really time consuming. You can go through it yourself. It took about 2 or 3 hours per page. Sometimes it took 30 minutes if it was just the simple updates. Sometimes it was more like 5 hours if we had to either rewrite a bunch of sections or add sections in, get images designed. So if you have the bandwidth and time, you could kind of spread it out and do it over the course of, let's say, 4 to 6 months. You could also hire a contractor who really knows their stuff and can take these initial notes and turn it into a more robust brief. Or you could meet in the middle and probably hire a freelancer that would be a little bit less expensive, but go through and create the more detailed briefs yourself. And if anybody wants a look at what that brief looked like, feel free to email me after. I'll share it at the end, and I can email you what we worked on. So that's the SEO case study. I know we said we'd take questions throughout. I'm running through stuff fast because there's 3 separate ones. So if I don't know, I can't see the questions if there are any questions.
Yeah, that's totally okay. If a question that's like super relevant to what you're chatting through comes up, I'll jump in and interrupt. We don't have any right now, so go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, and feel free to interrupt as well. Okay. Second case study, qualified keywords for qualified traffic. This was not with Sales Hacker. This was with Wizza, the 9 months I was there, and really focused in on about 6 months of that. None of these ideas are really my own. I combined a couple of different things here. Number one is that there's this, I think, understanding in content marketing that it's really hard to unseat major content marketing players like HubSpot, especially if you're in the same space, because they've been around forever. They have great content. They have all the links. So you're not going to unseat HubSpot's deep dive on ABM as your first SEO play. So what's the alternative? At Wizza, I took a combination of HubSpot's own pillar and cluster approach, which is essentially creating one pillar piece of content that goes really in depth on one topic. In this case, it was LinkedIn Sales Navigator. And then our other pillar was cold email. And then tie it to a bunch of cluster articles that get more detailed on specific elements of that. So the pillar for Sales Nav would do a brief rundown of features, reviews, how to use, best practices, pricing, and then additional articles would go through the specifics like using account lists, how to search features that are typically hidden, and those types of things. And then the second element was to tie each piece of content to top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel. And using those two in combination really made our growth take off. So again, I joined January of 2020 and started to put this content in place around May. And then it just grew from there. This isn't the main point of this one, but this is also kind of a case study in how SEO is a long-term play. So I actually left Wizza end of August, but they haven't really worked on new content since then. So all this growth is all those articles from that 6 to 7 month period continuing to gain steam as they get more backlinks and see more engagement. That's just kind of the aside. So for Wizza, it looked, like I said, there's the Sales Nav guide, and then middle of funnel was things like how to use Sales Navigator account lists, and then very bottom of the funnel was how to export leads from Sales Nav and current and similar topics. Let me catch up here. Like I said, it's my first time, so I'm still getting used to notes, slides, notes, slides.
You're doing great. It is very interesting.
So this part, this part is not exactly new, but it worked really well for Wizza. We got a ton of traffic from the LinkedIn Sales Nav guide once it started ranking, but it took longer to rank. We saw less traffic from how to export leads from Sales Nav, but one, it ranked a lot faster. I think we started ranking for it in like 2 weeks because it is such a specific topic and not as competitive. And two, it saw way more conversion. So we saw a ton of traffic from Sales Nav, but saw maybe a 2 or 3% conversion on how to export leads from Sales Nav. That's the literal use case for Wizza. So we saw, I think it was north of 40% conversion off of that page. So the idea here is to combine all three. You can start to build the foundation for your authority by building your content around pillars and connecting to clusters, but you can prioritize those bottom of funnel keywords and articles that will, one, get you ranked faster, and two, be a lot more interesting and relevant to your target audience and drive more conversions that way. A few things to remember on this one. Number one, higher volume keywords are not always better. Going back to HubSpot, you could do an ABM pillar page and probably not get it ranked because everybody on page one has way more SEO juice than you, unless you're one of those big players. And number two, it doesn't lead to very qualified traffic. So this is a simple screenshot of just a few articles looking at all the keywords they're ranking for pretty low keyword volume relatively, but we continue to see a lot of conversion off of them. Number two, it's not enough to write just one article on one topic and expect that to rank. I think the best way to get ranked fast and consistently, and then build your kind of base or your content moat over time, is that pillar cluster approach. I think there's a reason that's gone all over the place. It really works. That's what this approach was. And in that, you need to tie them together. So every time we publish any LinkedIn Sales Nav article, we tie it back to the pillar and vice versa. So over the course of 6 months, that net got stronger and stronger and stronger. And then the final piece on this one is make the connections super clear for your readers, especially for those bottom of funnel articles. So that how to export leads from LinkedIn Sales Navigator, it was essentially a guide on how to use Wizza because it's a very point solution. That's the use case, but it was a helpful guide that ran through the product with screenshots. And we saw more than, let's see, I think that keyword in particular, how to export leads from Sales Nav, had about a volume of 90. But that the keyword volume is kind of arbitrary and sometimes isn't super accurate because we saw over 1,000 visits on that article specifically, even though going into it, we thought maybe we'd get a couple hundred based off of the keyword volume. Got a little off track there, but with that bottom of funnel article, we made it super specific, super product focused, and tied a lot of CTAs into it to draw people in. So those are kind of the three side notes there. That's number two. Any questions coming in? All right.
Not yet.
So the idea, I'm not great with metaphors, but the idea is instead of just going in with a backhoe and trying to dig out that huge HubSpot of a boat, sometimes you can get strategic and use a shovel, and then sometimes you can dig in and go after bigger topics for the long term, like that Sales Nav pillar. And the last side note here is the secondary reason you wouldn't just go after those bottom of funnel keywords is, well, one, linking between them supports the whole thing. And two, it builds your authority and your trust over time. So you're not just doing those product focused bottom of funnel articles, you're providing resources to your audience. And over time, you build your authority on those specific topics. In Wizza's case, it was Sales Nav and cold email. We just got super specific on the two things we wanted to try to own from a content perspective. All right, last one is backlink outreach that matters. This one is near and dear to my heart because one, I spent a lot of time on backlink outreach at Wizza, and two, at Sales Hacker, I receive metric frick ton of backlink requests coming in for Sales Hacker. And some are really great and I'm very happy to oblige and it makes total sense. And some it's very low effort and it's very clear and becomes kind of this thing to get through. So the idea is you want to fall in that first bucket, not the second bucket as you're reaching out to sites. This was the progress at Wizza, again, just to kind of validate this idea. Started around here, this was January, and that right where it's the flat part on the top. And then by August, we were up to around 500. And then I'll touch on this in a second, but this last bit of growth on the top right, that's really from inbound, or not, sorry, not inbound, that's from unsolicited backlinks from people finding the content, linking back to it because it's helpful, because they're finding it on page 1 or page 2 of Google. This piece isn't super scientific, but I was trying to map how I think about backlinks in terms of categories. And I came up with 4 categories as I see them, at least. Number 1, high lift, high value backlinks. Those are things like G2, Marketing Profs, Crunchbase, the places where they have high domain authority and a good readership, so that you kind of get 2 birds with 1 stone, and you can publish guest posts there. It's not just about the backlink, it's also a little bit about the thought leadership or positioning, the relationship as well. These do take more time, but in my experience, they've been completely worth it, because you're not just reaching out for the backlink, you're reaching out for a relationship that pays off over time. There's kind of a dual, almost competing purposes here. I'd say number 1, prioritize these high lift, high value from the start. But then number 2, try to get away from them, at least just solely for SEO purposes, as soon as possible after the first 6 or 12 months, once you start to see some traction. If there's a secondary reason, building in public, product marketing, partnerships, integrations, whatever, totally makes sense. But if it's just for SEO, it takes a ton of time, and you can, if you're building great content, these sites might end up linking to you anyway, which again, I'll revisit in a second. The second one is outbound. I think this is what most people think of when they hear backlink building. This is, hi, I noticed that you have a broken link on this page. Would you be willing to replace with this great resource we have? Or I saw you have this great resource list of software. Would you be willing to add ours to the list? It works. Tons and tons of people are doing it, so it obviously works, but it's also going to either cost you a ton of time or a ton of money if you outsource it. There's a reason people outsource it, and there's a reason there's tons of people hitting up your email with pitches for the backlinks that they can provide you. So I didn't actually do much of this at all. I think I did a couple weeks of reaching out to the lists of software, but I didn't do any broken links. I didn't do the resources or anything like that, just because it can be really time consuming. So I'm not here to talk number 2 down. I'm just saying, if you're talking about doing more with less, you might want to hold off on this one to kind of keep it going after you've built the foundation with higher impact activities early on. Number 3 is inbound. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's things like G2. Rebecca Reynoso has a great guest post program at G2. And the idea is you set it up in a way where there's very clear guidelines. It supports your own content strategy. And then the flip side is, after they've placed a guest post, you can turn around and ask for a backlink or a guest post in return. Something that goes well with this is Roundup, something that Databox and Soapbox do really well, where they'll run a survey or reach out to people on social and gather those responses up into a full-fledged article. Both options work great in the long term, because you're getting those social links, and again, building those relationships that will be more valuable over time. And then the last are those unsolicited backlinks, where somebody links to your content because they found it either on social or Google, and you get all happy inside, because it typically doesn't ever happen in the early days. But then once you start to build your authority on a specific niche and your domain authority, you'll start to see more and more of those. So this isn't exactly across the board recommendation, but what really worked for me is doing number 1 and number 4 and leaving off number 2 and 3, at least early days, because they're really high effort and pay off in the long term, but maybe might not be the best for getting the ball rolling on your SEO. A little example of those unsolicited ones for Wizza is the Next Web, Get Response. These came in well after I left Wizza, even though they're on an article I worked on last year. So this was 30 cold email tips getting progressively better over time in terms of ranking. Whoever wrote the articles that Get Response in the Next Web, finding the article and then linking to it. Like every content marketer does this. You start an article, you go to Google, you see who's ranking, and you see where it makes sense to link out. So this ties back to that super strategic keyword strategy, so that over time you spend less and less time on link building and a lot more time on building just the best content that you can, which will in turn support your backlinking. So yeah, the takeaway there is like, people always say a backlink is a backlink for SEO juice. It totally is. But it's never just about the backlink. I think the key is to build those long-term relationships and spend your time on where the impact goes beyond just that one-off backlink. Yeah, so those are all three. I know I felt like I ran through really quickly, but I guess we're almost at time. This is my favorite part of being a content marketer, and my gig at Sales Hacker is talking to other marketers, salespeople, ops folks, sharing ideas, sharing what works, sharing what doesn't work. So feel free to reach out via email. I have some Sales Hacker swag, and happy to donate to a cause you care about, just to kind of get those conversations going. And for right now, happy to take any questions.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah. We have one that has come in via Slack. The question is, what tool do you use, or what tool do you recommend people use to track those unsolicited backlinks?
Yeah. I mean, currently I'm using SEMrush. Before I used Ahrefs. I'm not going to go endorse one or the other. I think they both do the job equally well. Yeah.
Cool. Perfect. I have a question myself, just because I'm on the sales side of things. I am not an expert at all. Honestly, didn't even know what SEO was before I started in this job. But something that I noticed specifically when you were talking about that, the pillar and cluster strategy, is that most of the titles of your content is like very close to what it looks like somebody would literally just Google in, if looking for the answer. Is that, am I catching something correct there? Like, what's the idea behind that?
Yeah, I'm trying to look for the other examples I had here, but that's totally it. It's less, let's see, UBM. It's going after what people are searching for. And quite like people, if people are Googling, they have a question in their mind. And your article needs to answer that. Pillar guides are great for the link structure and authority and pulling in links down the line, but they don't typically ever perform well in terms of conversion. So the whole idea of pillars is to support those more specific pointed answers to very specific questions. So like I said, instead of ABM Ultimate Guide, do how to measure ROI of ABM. Instead of event marketing software, do event marketing software integrations. So yeah, that's very much the idea.
Cool. Interesting. Yeah. Cause I guess when I think of like writing a piece of content, I would think, okay, how can I make sort of the most, I don't know. Well, I'm thinking of just like a snappy title that if it was like a written book or like a journal article, that's how I would kind of title it. When in reality, it seems it should be something that is as close to what somebody is Googling, so that I guess what I thought of was like, put a keyword in the title, as in like one keyword, as in like you were just saying, if we're talking about marketing automation, I put marketing automation among some other words in my like nice snazzy title, when in reality, the whole phrase can be the keyword if it's as close to what people are writing in Google as possible.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is those high traffic keywords versus long tail keywords. And those are the ones where it goes way down, the search volume goes way down, but people are very specific for what they're searching for. So, I mean, I don't have a super strong opinion on titles. As long as the SEO title is very direct and answers the question, you can get clever with the H1 on the page. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Very interesting. We have another question here from Alicia. I have a question about accepting links on behalf of Sales Hacker. So what kind of outreach emails do you respond to? What are the best outreach emails that get one's attention when looking for a backlink spot?
Yeah, I mean, if you want, I can send some examples if somebody wants to reach out after. I'll anonymize them. But the best ones are identifying a problem we have and a specific solution. So I actually do respond to broken link outreach if it's personalized, relevant, and changing out the link makes sense. I also respond to every single guest post inquiry that comes in that follows our guidelines. We have our guidelines published on the website and has a specific pitch. Is not, hi, do you accept guest posts? Especially if they're offering to pay for them, like those just get deleted because I know those are going to 500 other people. But if it's, here's my pitch for Sales Hacker, I think it's a great fit for your audience because XYZ, those will not only always get a response, but even if the topic isn't a great fit, I'll always work with you to land on a topic that works for you and works for the Sales Hacker audience. And I think I could say that I work pretty closely with Rebecca at G2 now. So I think I could say that applies pretty much across the board for anybody who's accepting inbound pitches.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And in that way, I think it apply the same kind of rules of inbound/outbound sales, marketing, whatever it is, apply where people are not interested in getting that mass sent out spray and pray email. They are interested in something that's really specific to them. And as you mentioned, like solving a specific issue or pain that they do have. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally makes sense. Any other questions from the chat, from YouTube? Of course, if you guys haven't thought of your question yet, or if you have a question that has gone unanswered, you can put it into our Slack community. And we have given Brooklyn access there. So he'll be in there and he can answer your questions there. And of course, you can reach out to Brooklyn. He's got his email address right here. So obviously very, very open to answering any of your questions. Yeah, we'll give a couple more minutes just to see if anything does pop up. Yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting that now thinking of the idea behind, as you mentioned, those kind of like short, high traffic keywords and then those long tail keywords. And it makes sense that your kind of overall pillar piece of content is something that probably a lot of other big players have put a piece of content out there like that. So it's not going to be the thing that is necessarily bringing you in those the qualified traffic, as you mentioned, but the more specific you get, the more likely you are to have people who actually have the problem that you can solve clicking on your stuff and then of course converting.
And the second way would be, oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
You get those pillar pages and those very high traffic is essentially brand awareness. You're getting thousands of eyeballs on your brand content every month, even if they're not converting well. So as long as you're adding in content that does convert well, that's still a great idea.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Another question here from YouTube. So keywords research or backlink or blog, which plays a major role in Google ranking?
Backlink. I'm not sure what the blog would be. And I'm going to be the typical like marketer answer and say it's both of those first two. Like you can't, it's going to be really hard to rank for anything, even those lower ones without any backlinks. Like you have to start building up that domain authority as soon as possible, like at the same time as you're building out the content. And it's a great idea to run distribution to the new content you're putting out. So reach out to people in your network and say, hey, we just published this, that would be relevant for you. As long as you're not being spammy about it, I think that's cool. So it's going to be both and for those first two. For the blog, I'm not. For the third, I'm not so sure what that would be.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, that looks like that might be it. Unless that person who asked about, the blog wants to give a little context on what they mean by the blog, then we can get that answered. But otherwise, I think that is it for now. Thank you so much, Brooklyn, for joining us to share. Incredible, a ton of really great content here that is applicable to all those marketers that are watching right now. And if you guys that are watching the recording later on, share that with your marketing colleagues. If you have any questions, you can pose them to Brooklyn here. Is there anywhere in particular that they can kind of follow? Of course, a Sales Hacker itself is a great place for content, but anywhere else that they can kind of learn from you?
I'm on LinkedIn a ton. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't, but it's been a great learning experience. I think it's fun to create content there. So probably LinkedIn, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, there you guys go. And thank you again, Brooklyn, to Sales Hacker for being a sponsor for this event. We're really, really grateful to work alongside you guys. And thank you again for coming on our event.
Thank you. Thanks to the whole team.